Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 1147 Creatures of Darkness. While Michael was busy solving the problem of the feast, the exhibition tournament was going exactly as planned. Phoenix easily advanced to the second round, defeating his opponent as handily as he did during the first round. It was at this point that everyone started to realize how talented he was in swordplay. This was probably because he had spent almost the entirety of his life having little to no ability power. Because of that, he honed his sword skills to the point where he could fully fight against other knights with much more powerful magnetic abilities. But now that he had ability power, his sword skills only became amplified multiple times. Some people were even saying that Phoenix would give Arthur a run for his money. This was a pretty strong compliment that should not be taken lightly. Some of Phoenix's knight friends were unfortunately knocked out in the second round. But the fact that they were still able to show a good fight only emphasized how powerful the chocolate ice cream was. It came to the point where some of the knights and swordsmen realized that they would be severely limiting themselves if they didn't eat chocolate ice cream before a fight. It became a sort of ritual. Before a fight, one must finish a gallon of ice cream before a candle's time worth. This only solidified the idea that chocolate ice cream equaled strength. As expected, this increased the sales for McTony's restaurant. Castell was very glad to see their stocks starting to trend upwards once again. Back at the Colosseum, it was now Jaku's turn in the second round. His opponent was a female swordsman, one that was famous for her use of multiple swords. She stood in the arena, 100 swords floating around her. Each one of those swords moved independently of the swordsman, yet they all displayed skill at the same level as she was. So, Jaku was basically fighting 100 opponents at the same time. This was what made her such a formidable opponent. Even Arthur wouldn't want to lower her guard against her. Many thought Jaku would finally lose. His little tricks from the last round won't work. She basically had 100 eyes on him at all times. No surprise attacks would be able to go past her. Jaku, on the other hand, once again yawned as he looked at the referee. "Are you going to start this?" Hearing such arrogant words, many people couldn't help but scoff. What made him so confident? Arthur was among them. He had his eyes fixed on Jaku, making sure he saw every single move. He wanted to see the level of swordplay he was going to be facing in the next rounds. Meanwhile, in a secluded area in the Colosseum, a group of vampires watched on with disinterest as the exhibition match continued on. Their cold demeanor and the glittering golden jewelry on their body depicted them as royal blood vampires, the very authority amongst their kind. They watched Jaku with a bit of scorn on their faces. "A demi-human," said one of them. "A demi-human using the powers of the human. How sad." The other royal blood vampires concurred with this observation. Demi-humans were basically the unevolved versions of beast folks. In their minds, if only Jaku completed his evolution, then he would have had access to his own beast heart, his own source of power that didn't need any modification. "We must find the one true religion." A vampire with short, braided, black hair sat on the grandest chair furthest in the room. He was the main leader of this little pack of royal blood vampires. "Yes, Sir Arthrax. We must find the true religion, and only then can these pitiful demi-humans receive the help that they need. Otherwise, they'll just be forever inferior to humans." Arthrax nodded. "Sir, the one called the Zentmeister Company has once again reached out to us. They are waiting for your response," said the vampire. A day ago, they were approached by the Zentmeister Company with a proposition. They wanted Arthrax's pack of royal blood vampires to help the Zentmeister Company during the feast. They wanted them to influence other vampires by purchasing their food and thereby giving them the tokens they needed for the rankings. And in exchange, the vampires would receive the help of the Zentmeister Company in finding their so-called true religion. In truth, Arthrax disliked having to need the help of the humans. As royal blood, he thought that they should be able to do it all on their own since they were fated to be the one to bring the true religion back onto the world. Unfortunately, they were having a lot of trouble. There was a lot of noise in the royal continent. False prophets, dead ends, and even broken dreams pestered them throughout their journey. This would have been fine. The royal blood vampires would have been a-okay with spending decades or even millennia searching for the true religion. However, Arthrax had been feeling something ominous for a long while now. He felt that something was coming, and that they needed to find the one true religion sooner rather than later. That was why he was starting to warm up to the Zentmeister Patriarch's proposal. His pride didn't matter in the search for their religion. If humans helped them achieve that goal, then so be it. It must have been Gaia's will from the very start. All right, tell them. Suddenly, just as Arthrax was supposed to agree to the terms, the room suddenly turned dark. Now, there was already no light source inside the room, but somehow it still got darker, grimmer. Vampires, being creatures of darkness, immediately knew that another person was among them. They bared their fangs, which grew out of their mouth and almost touched their lower lip. "Show yourself," Arthrax demanded. Suddenly, a new sound emerged. Boing, boing, boing. This squishy, bouncing sound completely underscored the tension in the room. "Hi," Fudge said. Chapter 1148 Betting Against a Slime. The royal blood vampires all stood alert at the sudden appearance of a violet slime. A slime monster? Did the demon queen send you? Arthrax gained confidence as he saw the violet slime approaching him. He raised his hand and said in an authoritative voice, "Under our authority of being royal blood vampires, I command you to stop and tell us your motive in coming here." But Fudge, seemingly not even hearing his words, still boinged his way towards the wary vampires. He bounced happily, completely bringing horror to the people in the room. Arthrax took a step back, appalled. "How?" he muttered in complete disbelief. Vampires and werewolves were both ruled under one hierarchy. The Demon Queen. She was the supreme being that ruled over them all, including monsters. As far as they knew, the Demon Queen was in control of all monsters, including this slime. So, imagine their surprise when they saw a talking slime so far away from their mother continent and seemingly without the influence of their Demon Queen. It was instilled in all lower monsters that they should always follow the rules and commands of those above them. The slime was the lowest species of all, and the royal blood vampires were among the top, only lower to the main forces of the Demon Queen herself. They should have been able to command the slime to stop in his place. Yet, he remained unconcerned with this breaking of the rules. This shouldn't even be possible. The nascent influence of a supreme being was permanent. "Who are you?" Arthrax asked warily. "Are you sent by the Demon Queen?" The only way the slime could have disobeyed Arthrax's command was if he was under the Demon Queen's order himself. Yet, Fudge's next words quickly debunked that theory. "Who? I'm not sent by some evil, pathetic woman." The royal blood vampires gasped out loud and cowered under their own hands. They were waiting for the inevitable lightning strike to smite the slime that dared to speak ill of the Demon Queen. Yet, even after a few seconds have passed, there was nothing. The slime had completely gotten away scot-free from his treacherous words. This meant that the violet slime truly wasn't a part of the Demon Queen's forces. So, then who was he? "Who are you? Why have you come here?" Arthrax asked. He was less wary about the slime, but he was still on his guard. Fudge finally stopped bouncing and landed right in front of Arthrax's feet. "My name is the Great Fudge, and I am here to enlighten you all of the truth." The royal blood vampires all looked at each other, confused as to what the violet slime meant. "You dimwits. I'm here to tell you the truth about the one true religion." As soon as he said that, the royal blood vampires tensed. And immediately, Arthrax's fingers elongated, his fingernails becoming as sharp as a nail. Then, he pointed this dangerous weapon at Fudge's body, just a few inches away from the slime. "I would suggest for you to be careful with your next words. We do not take blasphemy lightly. Whatever religion you are espousing about, it is not our religion. They've been duped too many times. You dare." Fudge's disembodied voice came out of nowhere. And suddenly, Fudge had disappeared from where he was. Arthrax's hands were threatening to pierce through nothing but the air. "I am simply extending grace," Fudge said. "As vampires, I figured that you all deserve to know that the one true religion has been found. But if you do not want to believe it, then it is your loss." Arthrax and the other vampires were still full of doubt. "How can you be so sure?" Fudge appeared behind the vampires, surprising them. "It's because I know." Arthrax and the other vampires couldn't help but scoff at Fudge's words. What kind of reasoning was that? It didn't make sense at all. If he wanted to convince them, then he should have presented some kind of physical evidence that they would have believed. "There are signs that the one true religion has been found. We haven't seen them yet," Arthrax said. "So it is extremely unlikely that what you said is true." Fudge scoffed at their words. "The Iron Maiden does not need your approval." The other vampires perked up once they heard that. They've heard of the Iron Maiden, of course. They've seen a few believers in New Sparta spouting some kind of worship for the automobiles on the streets. From that alone, Arthrax knew that the Iron Maiden wasn't their god. After all, their god was Gaia, the goddess that oversaw the world and everything natural. The automobiles were anything but natural. Then let us have a bet, Fudge said. Arthrax and the vampires were intrigued. What kind? If you win, then I shall leave you all alone and admit that I was wrong. But if I win, then you shall all follow my lead and ask for my forgiveness, Fudge said. The royal blood vampires all looked at each other, a silent understanding soon coming upon them. Arthrax nodded. Very well, we accept. How do we decide the winner of our bet? Fudge pointed at the magical one-way window showing the arena in full view. Jakku and his opponent were just about to clash against each other. The demi-human will win, Fudge declared. Very well, Arthrax agreed. We will take the side of the human swordsman. Fudge's eyes widened as he heard those sweet, sweet words. A magic circle appeared under their feet as their bet was solidified into truth. Ha ha ha! You idiots! Fudge couldn't help but laugh. But for the vampires, their choice couldn't lead to anything other than victory. In the arena, the knight referee tapped his sword onto his shield, signaling the start of the fight. Then it was over. In a blue flash of lightning, the woman swordsman found herself falling to her knees, cuts on her body suddenly bursting with blood. Silence. Chapter 1149 over in a flash. Nobody could believe what happened. In a flash, the fight was over. People barely even had enough time to register when the fight started. The woman swordsman was knocked unconscious in one fell swoop. Even though she had hundreds of swords floating around her as protection, each one having its own mind and instincts as she did, they still couldn't stop Jakku's lightning-fast onslaught. Winner, Jakku. During the first round, they thought he may have gotten lucky, caught his opponent lacking and off guard. But his opponent now could be considered as the pinnacle of the strongest defensive swordsman there was. But even still, she was defeated before everyone could take a single breath. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't luck. This was pure skill. The other knights and swordsmen in the exhibition tournament looked at Jakku with seriousness. They now treated him as a threat. With Jakku advancing to the third stage of the tournament, he was now part of the top 16. Nobody normal would be able to achieve this kind of success in a competitive environment such as this. Whoa, this demi-human is pretty good. I didn't even see what he did, but I'm impressed. Do you guys think he's comparable to the Formidable Five? The Formidable Five was the nickname the spectators had for the 5 favorite swordsmen to win the entire exhibition match. At 5th place, coming in from out of nowhere to take the spot was none other than Sir Phoenix. With his sword heart seemingly fixed, he was able to show the original talent he had before the accident. At 4th was Madame Villieu from the Tang clan. Her sword was venomous and slimy. A single bite could take down a dragon. At 3rd was Powell from the Oscorp Consortium. In 2nd place was Sir Ikshu, a swordsman versed in heavy swords. And of course, at 1st place was none other than Sir Arthur Lionheart, the clear winner and favorite in the competition. His power triumphed over everyone. Jakku may be good, but there was still some doubt whether he could be considered at the same level as these 5 swordsmen. What do you think, Arthur? Asked Powell. I personally think he's good. But I'm better. I agree. Speed doesn't matter in front of my stings, said Madame Villieu. They all tried to compare themselves to Jakku, and of course their opinions were heavily biased towards their own. But for Arthur he was more unsure. After all, what he saw was a little bit perplexing. He had his eyes open the entire time. He saw the moment when Jakku used his ability power to summon blue lightning and blitz his way through his opponent with ease. Yes, Jakku was fast. But that was it. Jakku's sword skills were, for lack of a better term, crude. It was as if Jakku only knew how to swing his sword in the most basic way. It's as if no one ever taught him the true essence of the sword, and only ever used the shallow meaning of the swing. Arthur didn't know what to think of this. Was Jakku weak or strong because of that? One could conclude from this that Jakku was not a good swordsman. But on the other hand, one could think that the demi-human's talent was so overwhelming that all he ever had to do was swing his sword and that was enough to defeat his opponents. Arthur, who do you think is faster between you two? Asked Sir Ikshu, and in response Arthur only smiled. Meanwhile, back in the darkened room, the royal blood vampires were completely shocked as they witnessed such a fast fight. They weren't even sure that they finished their bet with Fudge before the fight was already over. A demi-human winning the fight was already unexpected. But to win in such a fast time, the royal blood vampires couldn't help but feel as if everything they thought before was wrong. Demi-humans were supposed to be the unevolved versions of beast folks. But clearly that demi-human showed power above that of a human and a beast folk. All right, said Arthrax. I can admit when I am wrong. You have won the bet. A smile descended upon Fudge. Now you must fulfill the bet, he said. The royal brood vampires all turned towards Fudge, bowing towards him in a complete 90-degree angle. "We ask for your forgiveness, slime," said Arthrax. As royalty, bowing and admitting they were wrong was the ultimate sign of subservience. These royal blood vampires considered this as a heavy thing. But since this was part of a bet, they had no choice but to concede. "Now, we have fulfilled our bet." Just then, Fudge's smile turned evil. "Why do you think our bet was fulfilled?" "That wasn't the only thing that you need to do," he said. Arthrax's eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Fudge laughed maniacally, bouncing up and down as he did so. "My words were exactly this. If I win, then you shall all follow my lead and ask for my forgiveness. You have indeed asked for my forgiveness. But you have yet to follow my lead." The vampires frowned. "What would you like us to do? Let us get this over with?" Fudge smiled. "What, you think that this is a one-time thing? I didn't specify until when this bet is finished, so it means that it will happen in perpetuity. You'll be my slaves forever." Arthrax and the other royal blood vampires growled at Fudge. They couldn't believe that the slime would be so insidious. "Mr. Fudge, what have you been doing?" It was at this moment that a new, feminine voice echoed out into the room. Everyone turned to see a blonde-haired woman walk towards the violet slime. Arthrax immediately recognized her. Lilith. Lilith was another royal blood vampire, a leader of her own pack just like Arthrax. "Be careful of that monster." But before they could say anything else, Lilith picked up Fudge and began snuggling him in her chest. Chapter 1150 Cathedral. Lilith. They all stared at the blonde-haired vampires with complete and utter shock. Why was she snuggling with the literal devil incarnate? "Do not believe any words that he says, Lilith," warned Arthrax. "He is spouting nothing but lies." Lilith turned to look at her fellow royal blood vampires. "Mr. Fudge? What are you talking about? He's the most adorable pet there is." After hearing that, Arthrax and the vampires were completely speechless. How was that slime supposed to be adorable? He scammed them of becoming their slaves for life. He was the lowest there was, disregarding honor and virtue, which was the complete opposite way that a royal blood should act. That was why they couldn't believe that Lilith of all people were being chummy with the violet slime. It was at this point that Lilith turned to look at Fudge. "Mr. Fudge, have you been pranking these guys?" Fudge's eyes turned into puppy dog eyes, one that looked like those animated shows. I was bored." Lilith pursed her lips, before eventually rubbing Fudge's head. "Ah, I can't stay mad at you. You're just so darn cute." Arthrax felt a chill run down his spine. Somehow, seeing Fudge act all adorable was even more horrifying than when he showed them that evil smile. "Lilith, are you under his spell? Are you also a servant or a slave of his? Why else would she treat the demonic violet slime so well?" "No," Lilith replied. "He's not." The royal blood vampires heaved a sigh of relief. But that only lasted for a brief moment. "He's our prophet." Arthrax and the vampires almost fell to their knees. That was even worse. They couldn't believe that Lilith had fallen victim to the false words of this monster. Nothing he said should be taken as truth. "Lilith, you believe that our one true religion is the Iron Maiden?" Arthrax asked, a hint of disappointment in his voice. "I don't believe it." "I know so," Lilith replied. Seeing the doubt on their faces, Lilith elaborated. "I was one like you. I refused to believe that the Iron Maiden could be our one true god, especially since the records tell a different tale." The royal blood vampires nodded. "Yes, Gaia is supposed to be the embodiment of nature, of trees, of wood, of the ground. These constructs like the automobile are not a true representation of Gaia." Lilith chuckled. "You're interpreting the records a little too literally. I think that's the reason why it took us this long to discover the Iron Maiden." Then, Lilith pointed back to the arena, showing as Jakku walked out of the arena after his quick win. "What does the record say about demi-humans?" Lilith asked. "It tells us that the advent of Gaia will bring all species of the world closer together. The difference between us will disappear, and we will all partake in the power that she wields." It was only when Lilith said the words out loud did Arthrax and the other vampires finally realize the obvious connection. "You mean to tell me?" Lilith nodded. "Yes. How do you think that demi-human became so powerful, when all other demi-humans before him couldn't? It was only recently that demi-humans were suddenly able to wield ability power. Other attempts before had ended up in fatal accidents. Arthrax and the other vampires simply believed that this sudden change in demi-humans only happened because of some kind of innovation. Humans have been experimenting on this topic for millennia, after all. But what if that wasn't the case? What if the real reason was something more metaphysical, more supernatural, more godly? "Is this true?" Arthrax asked. "Yes," Lilith said with a smile. It was only because of the Iron Maiden that the Chosen One was able to break the limitations of demihumans to the point they were now. And he would continue to do so in the future as long as we do our job and spread the Iron Maiden religion onto the world. It was only now that the vampires felt that the light was cast on their faces. They were enlightened. Perhaps Lilith was right. Come. I will show you to our church, Lilith said as she disappeared into a shadow. Arthrax and his pack of royal blood vampires followed behind, soon reaching their destination. They ended up at a small hole in the ground, leading under the very floors of the Colosseum itself. The vampires were wide-eyed as they saw a pristine, newly built tunnel underground. They never even knew that there were secret passageways under New Sparta. We have made great progress in completing our cathedral, said Lilith. Cathedral? Where is that? Lilith and Fudge laughed. You're standing in it, Fudge said. This surprised the vampires even more. This was the cathedral? Wasn't it a bit unorthodox? Where was the altar to worship? Where were the pews? The frescoes painting the wonders of Gaia? It was only when they kept on walking through the tunnels and entered into a completely new dome did they realize just how big these underground tunnels were. What is this? Lilith smiled. Welcome to the Cathedral of the Iron Maiden. The vampires were slack-jawed as they saw an entire civilization at the end of the tunnels. One could even classify this place as an entirely new town. At the center of the cathedral was a statue of the Iron Maiden. Ethereal, metallic, and ever-present. Anywhere one looked, they would be able to see her grand statue at any time they wanted. The statue stood on a grand platform, an altar circular in shape. It held all the necessary decorations to make this a true cathedral. Beyond the altar were the pews, where hundreds of people were currently worshipping the statue of the Iron Maiden. What surprised the vampires the most was the fact that they were all varied in species. Some were human, some were demi-human, and there were even beast folks among them, including the elusive draconians. They couldn't believe it. This cathedral looked exactly like the paradise that was promised in the records. Chapter 1151 Vampire Discovery. The records talk about the effects of Gaia's return. It speaks of unity between all races, with seemingly no differences between either one of them. No grievances, no bad blood. And from what they saw right now, it looked exactly like that. The different species of the world were all worshipping the Iron Maiden under one roof, becoming comrades among each other, unified by their love of the Iron Maiden. They couldn't believe it. Could this truly be the religion that was stated in the texts? It sure looked like it. Lilith and Fudge continued to take them all over the cathedral. Who is that? Arthrax asked them as they looked at another statue that was beside the Iron Maiden. It was the image of a young man, bright smile, and an overall aura of warmth around him. The people weren't worshipping this statue. Instead, they were all treating him as if he was an integral part of their lives. Whenever they finished one of their tasks, they nodded to the statue in gratefulness. That is the Chosen One, said Lilith. He is the one that made all of this possible. Through his guidance and through his leadership, we are all able to worship the Iron Maiden without having to worry about anything. The royal blood vampires finally noticed that the living situation here seemed to be even better than the living situation on the surface. Here, the entire room was brightly lit through those strange glass bulbs, which didn't seem to have any need for any magic at all. And they could also see people gathering water for their daily needs through a simple twist of a lever. Even magicians wouldn't be able to summon magic so easily. It was also the perfect temperature. Not too hot, not too cold, even though they must have been about hundreds of meters away from the surface of New Sparta. 012. They couldn't believe it. This utopia was made by that small human child? I never knew such a paradise existed just under our very feet. If I had known, then I would have loved to visit this a few months ago, Arthrax said. Lilith shook her head. This didn't exist a few months ago. It's only been about a week, I think. Fudge nodded. Yes. I'm keeping this cathedral as a secret from Master, so we need to move slowly. The royal blood vampires were understandably full of doubt. How could this entire civilization have been built within a few weeks? This dome wasn't even the end. On the walls of the dome, they saw multiple other tunnels seemingly leading to other rooms like an ant's nest. Why build it underground? Arthrax asked. If you wanted to spread the influence of the Iron Maiden, then you should have built it up on the surface. Red tape, that's why, Fudge complained, huffing. It's because there's a lot of bureaucratic process in New Sparta. We'd have to go through so many hoops and so many political machinations that this cathedral would have never been built at all. That's why our prophet Fudge decided to build the cathedral underground. That way, we wouldn't have any limits as to how big we can make our territory. The more Arthrax and the others were introduced to the religion of the Iron Maiden, the more they were impressed. From the rumors they heard about it, they thought that this religion was simply a budding cult, one that was full of weirdos who worshipped automobiles. But seeing their capabilities in person, they couldn't help but admit that they were probably as strong as a mid-sized organization in the upper echelons. "We'll be building you your own quarters here under one of those tunnels," Lilith said. Arthrax raised his hand. "I'm sorry, Miss Lilith. We're not so sure about that yet. It's not that we doubt your words, but the matter of our one true religion is simply too important. I believe that we would better serve the religion if we go out there and search for more clues. Once we find the clues left behind by our progenitor, then we can be more sure that the Iron Maiden religion was truly the one we'd been looking for." It was at this point that Arthrax felt a tugging from the ends of his coat. He turned around, noticing that a blonde-haired woman was sitting on her knees, looking up at him with curiosity. At first, he thought that he was looking at Lilith. The two bore a close resemblance, though this new girl looked a little bit younger. Anyway, like I was saying, he felt a tug again. Arthrax, at this point, was starting to get annoyed. He quickly turned around, finally noticing that the woman looked weird. Not in a physical way, but in some other unexplainable characteristic. She looked like a vampire, but her physical characteristics were distinctly unvampire-like. And something about her was also weird. Somehow, when Arthrax looked at her, felt something in his chest. A tugging. A beat in his heart that felt as if he was seeing an old friend. He felt comfortable when he looked at her. It felt as if he had returned back to his home and embraced his mother. Then, a bolt of light came from the ceiling. Arthrax's entire body glowed with ethereal power. He was being bathed in this sacred feeling that came straight from his heart. It was only at that point did he realize the truth. Instinctually, he knew. This woman was none other than the progenitor that had brought the vampires into the world. There was no doubt about it. He was staring at the original one. The other royal blood vampires also felt that familiar tug. And immediately, they bowed to the ground in prostration. Their blood told them the truth. "Progenitor!" They screamed out. Kuno tilted her head at their strange behavior. "Fudge! What are they doing?" Fudge jumped into Kuno's arms. "They're finally ready. Ready to become my servants. Ha 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 ha." Chapter 1152 Meeting the Shooter Knights. They were telling the truth. The Iron Maiden was the one true religion they'd been looking for all this time. Arthrax slapped his own forehead. He couldn't believe that he doubted their words for even a second. He was even planning on getting out of New Sparta because he didn't think that they were telling the truth. If that had happened, he would have missed out on the greatest thing that would have happened to his life. Not only did they find Gaia, who turned out to be the Iron Maiden, but they were also introduced to the progenitor of the vampire race. The original vampire herself. When she disappeared some thousands of years ago, many people thought that she died. Even the other vampires have come to terms with the fact that their progenitor had been killed alongside the disappearance of their religion. But as it turned out, she was here. Any royal blood vampire would immediately be able to recognize her. It was built into their very body. Arthrax immediately felt a cold shiver run down his spine. It wasn't because of Fudge's words about them being his servants. It was because Arthrax almost performed an even greater sin. If Fudge hadn't made that bet with them and forced them to come to this place, then they wouldn't have found out the truth. They were lucky that being servants was their only punishment. In fact, after knowing that the violet slime was telling the truth, they were now very happy serving the prophet of Gaia with no reservations in their heart. "Now let us introduce you to the rest of our religion." Lilith, Fudge, and Kuno led the royal blood vampires through the cathedral, espousing the history of the Iron Maiden as well as their teachings. It wasn't long before Arthrax and his pack of vampires became incredibly obedient towards Fudge. "We are at your service," they said, kneeling on the ground. "We will do whatever we can to help spread the ideology of Reborn." They were also told about Reborn's connection to the church, as well as the importance of their nation and business. "Ha ha 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 ha." Fudge laughed maniacally. "Very well. For your first order of business, you must introduce me to your other royal blood vampires. They must become my servants too." Michael was quite disappointed with Jakku's result. He wasn't mad that the lazy Dragonborn won. He was mad at how easy he had it. He thought this competition would finally make Jakku open his eyes to practice. Yet, it had done the opposite. With how easy he had it defeating his opponents, it only veiled his opinion that practice didn't matter, only sleep matters. Michael had a bad feeling that Jakku was going to breeze through this competition without much problem. "What the hell? I thought this competition would bring out the best youthful talents from all over the globe. Of course, those swordsmen really were talented. Jakku was just better." Hopefully, Jakku would face a little bit of trouble in the top 16. The next round eventually commenced, pitting those 16 swordsmen in a single elimination bracket. And as the first fight started, Michael was suddenly contacted by one of the Shadow Orc chiefs. "Naruto, what's up?" The Orcanine chief pumped his muscles and banged it with his fists with rhythm. "Biu Tutu. We have some movement, boss. The ersatz? Michael asked gravely. No, boss. We have seen a few humans stalking around the place where the ersatz members disappeared off to. It seemed that they weren't the only ones tracking the ersatz movement. Who were they? They seemed to be from the Order of the Heavenly Knights, boss. They bore that emblem on their armor. Narito gave Michael a printed picture of the supposed knights tracking ersatz. Michael immediately noticed that they weren't like the knights he saw here in New Sparta. These knights wore minimal armor, seemingly prioritizing their mobility rather than defense. On their backs were bows and crossbows. They seemed to be knights from the way of the shooter. ChatJK6 gave him a brief description about this faction of knights. It seemed that they used long-ranged weapons as their main weapons, with a reputation of being stealthy hunters. Do you know their mission? Are they here for recon or infiltration? Narito kneeled in repentance. Apologies, boss. We are far too weak to figure out the truth. They are being protected by a powerful figure that we dare not cross. Just taking a picture of them almost blew away our stealth. We have reason to believe that they are being led by a heavenly knight himself. Michael's eyebrows raised as he heard that. A heavenly knight from the way of the shooter. He did hear that there were more heavenly knights in New Sparta because of the exhibition. But it seemed that they were also here for a completely different reason. Good job. Don't disturb them and don't come close to them, Michael said to Narito. Although they were after the same enemy, that didn't mean that they were allies. At least not yet. Not when he didn't know their purpose. He also didn't want anyone else knowing that they were hunting after the ersatz. But just as Narito was about to descend down into the shadows, a completely new shadow emerged right next to him. It was Sasuke. The Orcupine chieftain kneeled at Michael with a worried expression on his face. Boss, we may have a problem, he said. Michael was immediately alert. Did the ersatz faction move? Did they discover their involvement in the stronghold siege? Were they attacking Reborn? What is it? The knights were approached by some people, Sasuke said. And Sasuke's face turned awkward. And I think you should see them for yourself. Michael followed behind the shadow orcs as they teleported out of New Sparta and into a forest perched atop a cliffside. They were at the very edge. And down below, Michael saw the knights interacting with a few other people. They were vampires. And a little violet slime. Chapter 1153 Knights Meeting a Slime. Michael was flabbergasted once he saw that mischievous slime. Once again, it was somewhere where he wasn't supposed to be. That's Lilith and Kuno with him, he realized. He had been leaving Fudge alone for the past couple of weeks simply because he was far too busy with his tasks in New Sparta. He knew that this would give the little slime the opportunity to make some trouble, but there was nothing else he could do. Let me see what you've been cooking up, he said as he released one of his mini drones down into the bottom of the cliff. With him personally controlling the drone, he was sure that the knights wouldn't be able to sense him coming. Of course, he couldn't come super close. After all, they were still guarded by a heavenly knight. Even though he wasn't anywhere near this place, he wasn't going to be underestimating a guy like that. He moved his drone just enough so that he could hear their conversations. Sir Arthrax, it is good that you have come, said one of the knights. The vampire with pale white skin and short black hair shook hands with each of the knights from the way of the shooter. You require our services, replied Arthrax. It is only the duty of the royal blood vampires to fulfill good deeds for those that are less fortunate than us. Of course, if other people heard that, they might have thought that was an insult. But that was just how royal blood vampires treated themselves. They believed in noblesse oblige. Thankfully, it seemed that the knights were already accustomed to dealing with the vampires, otherwise, there would have been a fight breaking out here. We didn't think that you'd be bringing your acquaintances, the knight said, sparing a glance at the other vampires beside Arthrax. And a pet. Fudge, thankfully, was enjoying his time. They are with me. They're trustworthy, Arthrax declared. The knight awkwardly scratched his hair. Our business is a matter of extreme privacy, he said. More people knowing about it could spell the literal doom of thousands of people. But despite the severity of the situation, Arthrax didn't budge. You should be grateful. If it weren't for the fact that we have had this meeting scheduled a few days before, I wouldn't have even come. Thankfully, my master and my seniors are willing to let me go as long as they are here to observe everything. Arthrax and the other vampires wanted nothing more than to spend their days in the Cathedral of the Iron Maiden. Unfortunately, the heavenly shooter himself had asked a favor from them. Of course, Fudge allowed for this to happen because he wanted to snoop Michael Guest. But admittedly, he was curious as well. What would the knights need from the vampires? I guess we have no choice, said the knight. But I must reiterate the need for privacy. No one can know about this. With a nod, the knight urged his comrades to pull out something from a wooden chest. It was a scroll which, once unrolled, turned out to be a map, which showed the layout for the royal continent focused on New Sparta and its surrounding territories. There was a large X mark on a mountainside just beyond a valley that was a few kilometers away from here. "We would like your expertise on stealth," the knight said. "We are hunting down a particular set of opponents. One that is hard to track down even with the best hunting ability powers. Vampires were famous for their stealth as well as their ability to detect them. That was why for this mission, the knights decided it would be best if they hired one of the best royal blood vampires capable of getting the footprints of those pesky ersatz. Arthrax was infamous, in the sense that many conglomerates and upper echelons wanted to hire them for many of their projects. Unfortunately for them, Arthrax was disinterested in such asinine jobs. He rejected them coldly. It spoke to his reputation that the conglomerates and the upper echelons still had a good relationship with him despite him always turning them down and not giving them face. "The Order of the Heavenly Knights will be incredibly grateful for your help on this. As you and our master have discussed, we will be helping you find any clues about your supposed religion in the future," said the knight. Arthrax and the other royal blood vampires would have been accepting this job without a second of hesitation. But after they figured out the truth, there was no need to do these human jobs anymore. "Since a vampire is only as good as his word, I will fulfill this request. I promised your master, after all. But I do not need your help anymore. We have already found our religion." The knights were extremely surprised when they heard that. After all, they were told that each and every vampire's lifelong dream was to find their religion. And even after thousands upon thousands of years of searching, they haven't found a single clue. But now they just found it? This seemed like news that should shake the very foundation of the world. Vampires were integral to the underworld of society. Most of their stealth jobs were under the premise of finding their religion. They didn't want money, fame, nor power. Only information. But now that they found it, what would happen then? "You are in luck." The knights whipped their heads around at the booming voice, only to realize that the sound came from the violet slime that was perched atop the one of the lady vampires. "A talking slime?" The knight muttered confusedly. "I will be helping you this time. Be grateful," Fudge said. Arthrax and the vampires went wide-eyed when they heard that. "Are you sure, Prophet? You need not lower your hands for this. If you are going to do this, then it must be something the Iron Maiden wants," Arthrax realized. Chapter 1154 New Servants. "Praise be. You're right. It must be a message from the Iron Maiden herself. What are you doing, knights? Bow down in thanks." The knights were completely flabbergasted when they saw such strange reactions from the vampires. They were talking as if the slime was superior to them. It's as if the violet monster was somehow better and more powerful than royal blood vampires, which seemed idiotic to think about. We do not need a monster's help on this. We need the vampire's specialty with stealth." Arthrax looked completely offended by the knight's words. "Prophet, I apologize for the knight's words. He does not know what he is saying." The knight was completely at a loss for words as the vampires gave him a glaring look, as if he did something wrong. Finally, Arthrax explained, "Our Prophet Fudge is the strongest warrior of the Iron Maiden. Anything that vampires could do, he could do better. He is shadow incarnate." After hearing such words, the knights looked at the innocent violet slime with a curious and doubtful look. This monster was better than Arthrax. They just couldn't see it. "Foo-foo-foo," Fudge laughed. "O ye of little faith," he snapped. And suddenly, the world around the knights suddenly began to twist and form. They looked around, only to find themselves in a completely new environment. One that was completely dark with only the lambent light of candles illuminating everything. "What? Where are we? How did this happen? We were in a forest just a second ago." It was at this point that the vampires laughed and cheered with praise. "As expected of the Prophet. Praise be. Even I couldn't sense it. Amazing as always, Prophet Fudge." Arthrax and the other royal blood vampires were already privy to Fudge's powers, but they were still as surprised as the first time they saw it. How is this possible?" asked the knight. As practitioners of the way of the shooter, they were confident in their senses. Others sharpened their bodies, they sharpened their minds. One could even say that their weapon wasn't their bow, but their brains. However, up until the violet slime snapped, they couldn't sense anything. They were all in the high 7th stage of the body formation realm. They should have sensed something as powerful as magical teleportation. And judging from their scenery, they weren't teleported anywhere near where they were before. It was at this point that they began to realize that Arthrax was telling the truth. This little harmless slime was even more powerful than they thought. Perhaps he could be the one that they needed to finally hunt down those pesky ersatz rats. "I apologize for our behavior earlier. We were not familiar with your power," said the knight, performing a formal bow. "Now, would you please return us to our original location, so that we may return to our guarded post? Fudge hopped his way towards the knight, and with a smile that seemed all too sinister, he said, "Well, you'll have to sign a contract first." Michael was very disappointed in Fudge. How could he have taken advantage of those poor, helpless knights like that? You could have stopped them, you know? Shut up. Okay, he had to admit. Having a few insiders within the Order of the Heavenly Knights would be very good. Just as a precaution, it was always good to cover their ground as much as possible. Just like now, if he had known that they were planning a sting operation on the ersatz members, then he would have been able to prepare and act accordingly. But at least now they would be informed. Fudge somehow convinced the knights to sign their freedom away in exchange for a favor, which was to help them in their mission against ersatz. They were tricked. After all, Michael would have ordered Fudge to help them in the mission anyway. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Anyway, they were led back to the forest where the knights began to discuss with them about their plans. "Sir Prophet, sir," said the knight, not knowing how to properly address the little slime. "We know that they have a pocket dimension in this area. What we don't know is why. We would like to figure that out and stop them, not matter what." Fudge looked over the table filled with paper plans. Is that it? You are all not prepared to fight this opponent." The knights were startled. They were the very best of the best when it came to this type of mission. They were the personal students of a heavenly knight, after all. "If it helps you, Sir Fudge, we have a heavenly knight that is going to guide and help us along the way." Fudge scoffed. "Only a heavenly knight? I guess that's okay." The knights were inwardly shocked. Even this little slime was not impressed with a heavenly knight. Just how powerful was he? And how powerful was the chosen one that they seemed to be talking about? "Let's go see him," said Fudge. "I'll see for myself if he is good or not. If he isn't, then I won't help." It was at this point that the knights started to panic. They needed Fudge's help. "Our master is currently away talking with an acquaintance of his. He would be asking them for a favor, wanting some kind of weapon that would help in our mission." Fudge nodded. "Okay, let's go." The knight stopped the little slime as he was in the middle of a teleportation spell. "Wait, Sir Fudge. We're not the only ones who will be participating in this mission. We have a few groups from the conglomerates and the upper echelons who have decided to donate their manpower for this mission." Fudge's face twisted into one of entertainment. Good, ha ha ha. "More servants for me," he said. "By the way, what kind of weapon did this heavenly knight want?" "It seems to be called the Compound Bow." Chapter 1155 Garrison. Fudge, the royal blood vampires, and the newly minted knight servants went on their way to the meeting place with the other groups. Michael closely followed behind. They arrived at a nondescript grassland in the middle of nowhere, with absolutely no discernible landmarks anywhere near. The knights then walked forward, raising their hand and summoning a yellow magic circle. After all, their camp was located just beyond this. It was invisible to the mortal eyes, unless you were able to solve the magical problem that only the members of this mission were privy to. That's why the knight needed a lot of concentration. However, before he could even finish a third of the magic, Fudge just happily hopped over to the plains and created a hole on the very fabric of reality. Fudge's shadow infected everything, making them recoil and finally revealing the populated garrison inside. The vampires nodded proudly, while the knights were once again stunned into silence. This magic spell should be imperviable to body formation magnetics. Unless one was a nascent spirit cultivator, then they couldn't just stroll inside without letting other people notice the intrusion. Michael was very glad that he followed behind. He already noticed the hidden pocket dimension in the grass, thanks to his drone vision as well as his nascent spirit intuition. And just as he thought, the little mischievous slime was going to be strolling in through with no fear, even though he knew that there would be a defensive measure in place. "That slime, he knows I'd save him." At the very last moment, Michael inhabited the mini-drone on Fudge's mithril cape, allowing him to imbue the weapon with nascent spirit power. Usually, that wouldn't be enough to circumvent a defensive measure of this quality. After all, this was something that a high-leveled nascent spirit created. However, ChatJK6 quickly enhanced the knight's magical key and reverse-engineered it to create an entirely new key based on Fudge's power. And since Fudge was already incredibly skillful in intrusion, that added all up to be able to break through the defenses. However, ChatJK6 quickly enhanced the knight's magical key and reverse-engineered it to create an entirely new key based on Fudge's power. And since Fudge was already incredibly skillful in intrusion, that added all up to be able to break through the defenses. "Sir," the knights now kneeled in front of the little violet slime, complete devotion reflected on their eyes. As knights in the way of the shooter, they knew just how hard it was to break through this kind of defensive magic spell. After all, it was made by their master, the heavenly shooter. Yes, he didn't specialize in creating defensive constructs, but that only meant he wasn't the best at it. Compared to other nascent spirit cultivators, He was still better than them. This solidified the idea that Fudge was some kind of godlike figure, who was only embodying the form of a slime to seem harmless. He was the perfect hunter. That little trick of Fudge seemed to have completely captured the hearts of these knights. Now, Michael bet that they'd follow Fudge even without the contract. That sly slime. Ha 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 ha. Onwards, my loyal steeds, Fudge said. And so, the knights held Fudge on top of their heads and strolled forwards into the hidden garrison. Michael closely followed behind with the drone, taking in the sights. The garrison was huge. It was the size of a village at the very least. Everything was enclosed by hexagonal walls, each one ending with a watchtower that was guarded by archers, wizards, and knights alike. Michael noticed that everyone here was quite strong. No one below the 5th stage of the body formation realm, that's for sure. We currently have 6 factions in the garrison, each one stationed at their own side of the walls, said the knight. We have the Order at the bottom, the Guild of Arcana at the top. Then we have 1 conglomerate and 1 upper echelon company on each side. Who's the 4 companies? Fudge asked. The Zentmeister Company and the Hephaestus are on the left side, and the Moon Rising and Goldstein Conglomerate on the right side. The hexagonal garrison housed all 6 factions in charge of hunting down the ersatz. Michael was glad to know that these companies were his allies. He didn't know what kind of criteria the Order had when creating this motley crew, but he expected them to have high standards. But of course, he'd send out mini-drones towards their group just to be sure. The group strolled inside, catching the eyes of the people inside. They were in the middle of sharpening their swords, tightening their uniforms when they heard a bouncing boing-boing echo through the 6-sided walls. Many didn't think much of it. Probably a pet of the vampires, they thought. At the very center of the garrison, a campfire had started where a group of noble-like people were gathered into a discussion. The knights headed there directly. Isn't this a little too risky? We should have had a smaller, elite team doing this. No, this is the perfect time. Everyone is distracted by the exhibition tournament. It's already in the top 16. We should finish this before the finals. And even if it's not, it's imperative that we fight the ersatz. They're gathering this many men. We can't let them get away with this kind of buffoonery. It was at this moment that they noticed the arrival of the knights. Ah, they're here. Sir Pilder, have you completed your task? The knight saluted in respect. Yes, Mr. Gordon. We have recruited the royal bloods. Michael was surprised to see Gordon Zentmeister in the flesh. He was the very person that they were clashing against in the feast. The stern, short-haired man nodded in respect after seeing Arthrax. Nobles of the Demon Continent, I am Gordon, patriarch of the Zentmeister clan. I will be taking charge of this whole operation. This was quite surprising to Michael. The Zentmeister company may be in the top 15 of the upper echelons, but they were still quite lower in stature compared to the 2 conglomerates in the garrison. Was Gordon really that impressive that he was chosen amongst other conglomerates? Chapter 1156. No need for that. Let me introduce you to each of our factions. From the Hephaestus clan, we have the illustrious Sekka, son of the fiery hammer saint. He's in charge of arming our men with the best set of armors and weapons we can muster. Then we have the Moon Rising Company. They are in charge of logistics, transporting our men to strategic positions as soon as possible. They are led by Mr. Wadeby. On your right is the Goldstein Conglomerate. They will be providing us with the territory and space for our battles. They have been the one to graciously donate this insurmountable pocket dimension for our cause. We are also aided by the Guild of Arcana. They are being led by the gravitational twins, Taro and Terra, monstrous magicians who have the combined power of a mystic master. And of course, I believe that you've already met the knights. Now, all we're missing is the heavenly shooter. Each of those people were big names all on their own. The fact that they have all gathered here today meant that they were treating this mission against the ersatz as a really big deal. Even the royal blood vampires were a big deal in and of themselves. Everyone, I believe you already know the Silent Killer, said Gordon. Silent Killer. It was Arthrax's moniker during his stint as a shadow for hire. He was very famous for assassinations and espionage without anyone ever knowing he did it. Because of this, everyone looked up to this monstrous figure. Some feared him. Most dreaded to meet him. However, Prohet Fudge, are they acceptable to your standards? Arthrax asked, kneeling in kowtow towards the violet slime. His reputation as this cold-blooded killer was immediately shattered as soon as they saw this behavior. They just couldn't imagine the Silent Killer bowing down to someone like this, with seemingly complete subservience. And to a slime, no less. What is happening? Asked Gordon. Sir Pilder immediately explained. This is Master Fudge. He is the master of the royal blood vampires. Of course, doubt immediately flashed across everyone's eyes. They'd never heard of a slime being a royal blood servant. It was exactly the opposite way around. Fudge jumped atop Arthrax's head. Humph, I guess they'll be all right. A bit too weak, but they'll have to do. Everyone looked at each other with an awkward energy. This completely lowered the reputation and trust they had for the so-called silent killer. If he was bowing himself to a slime, then can he be trusted with an important mission such as this? Ahem, if we forgo stealth, then we'd have to completely focus on firepower. Right? We'd have to go into this completely expecting them to figure out our plans. That's what we're waiting for, said Gordon Zentmeister. We'll have to wait until Huntrax completes his mission. I hear he's made contact with the elves. Everyone's spirits were lifted up once they heard that, especially those from the Hephaestus conglomerate. This compound bow will completely change the game. I've only briefly seen it in action, and it's already the best I have ever seen in my life, said Blacksmith Sekka. Such praises from a Hephaestus blacksmith should never be taken lightly. They've all seen the compound bow wielded by the White Dragonborn, and she completely dominated the game. Because of that, everyone was immediately interested in her weapon. And it didn't take long before they figured out where the compound bow came from. It was the elves. They seemed to be in possession of not one, not two, but tens of them at a single time. The elves seemed to have found a way to create the very best bow in existence. One that used darkwood and mithril artifacts as their main materials. And now, the heavenly shooter was trying to earn the elves' favor so that they may bestow their arms in this fight. Each and every single one of the factions here had contributed a lot of money and resources in order to acquire their help. There is no need to do that, said the violet slime. Everyone turned towards Fudge, surprised at his eloquence. He can talk. Fudge hopped on over towards the very center of the campfire, taking the spotlight as if it was the most normal thing possible. Even Gordon had to step back subconsciously, which surprised the patriarch. If it's just the compound bows that we are waiting for, then we should just go over there and finish this mission as fast as possible. No need for dilly-dallying like this. Everyone frowned after hearing such words from Fudge. They were very busy doing preparatory work for one of the most dangerous missions possible. Yet, this slime was labeling it as nothing more than dilly-dallying? You don't know what you're saying. The compound bow is crucial for defeating these rats. We can't get close to them or else we'll spook them into hiding. Long-ranger weapons are the key to victory, argued Gordon. Fudge clicked his tongue. No, speed is the key. We just blitz them when they aren't expecting it, and we win. Everyone thought that this was such a simple plan. No complexity or depth at all compared to what Gordon had laid out for them. It wouldn't work on such opponents like the ersatz rats. Why are we entertaining the words of a slime? He's not the designated leader. We've all collectively agreed that Gordon will be the only voice in this plan to ensure unity, argued one of the Moon Rising members. Right? Let us just wait for the heavenly shooter to return. He'll surely have the compound bows by then. Nobody took the words of the slime seriously. After all, he had no credentials. They just went with their original plan, which was to wait for the elves' help. Thankfully, that happened quite earlier than expected. The pocket dimension opened, and soon a man wearing raggedy clothes came in with a few pointy-eared people behind him. Everyone rejoiced. It was the elves. Chapter 1157 Real Owner. Huntrax was a man who seemed like he would blend into a crowd. He didn't have the stature one would expect from a heavenly knight, that's for sure. He looked like one of those beggars that were ever present in any big city. If it weren't for Michael's intuition as a nascent spirit cultivator, he wouldn't have felt those tremendously sharp senses coming from the man. Michael knew that Huntrax felt every stare, every ear and nose pointed in his direction, even if he didn't seem like he did. He was a man who was keenly aware of his surroundings. ChatJK6 even warned him to step back a few tens of feet in order to ensure that his presence wouldn't be detected. Thankfully, Huntrax didn't seem all that interested in other people. He looked behind him, towards the elves that he had brought with him all the way from New Sparta. Michael recognized them. That elven lady filled with the grace and attitude of a mature and experienced woman was none other than Lady Farron. Behind her were the other elven guards of their village, all having their compound bows slung across their backs. They were much stronger than he had seen them before. More confident, more powerful. The compound bows looked good on them. And he wasn't the only one of the same opinion. The other factions in the garrison all stopped their breaths as they felt the powerful aura emanate from the elves. From just their first initial impression alone, everyone knew that they would need the elves' help in this fight. Gordon Zentmeister walked towards Lady Farron and bowed. Propers elves, thank you for gracing us with your presence. The patriarch of the Zentmeister company once again went through the motions as he introduced the different factions to the newcomers. And unlike with the vampires, the faction leaders all presented their good sides to the elves, wanting to impress them. As a blacksmith, I can only wonder what kind of artist had created a bow such as yours, Blacksmith Sekka said. If you would like, We would like to extend you an invitation of our kiln back to the Hephaestus estate. A visit with a conglomerate estate was high esteem that only a few people were given the privilege of having. But Lady Farron seemed disinterested. Instead, she looked around the garrison. And eventually something caught her eye. But before she could reach out and say something, the Moon Rising representative talked to her. Lady Farron, right? We are extremely grateful for your lending of the compound bows. Just say anything, and we will be prepared to offer you any kind of compensation, Mr. Wadeby said. Lady Farron whipped her head to the rude guy. The other elves shot dagger looks at him. He flinched. Under no circumstances will these bows leave our hands. We will only be lending our arms, not our weapons. And make no mistake, we are not doing this for monetary gain, but simply because the heavenly shooter had asked me a favor. Mr. Wadeby stepped back, clearly feeling the hostility from the elves. What Mr. Wadeby means to say is that we do not want your fellow elves to risk their lives for this mission. Better to send our men to fight in the front lines, rather than your elves. Lady Farron frowned. My warriors will do whatever they please. We will not be lending you our compound bows. The other factions began to look at each other with worried glances. Now they had two plans that were about to go awry. First, they planned to use stealth. But after seeing the state in which Arthrax and the other royal blood vampires were in, that seemed completely unlikely. They would be risking more of their lives if they went all out in stealth. It would be better to simply go in and surprise attack the ersatz. No stealth involved. But for that to happen, they needed a lot of firepower that would be able to blitz the ersatz members. They couldn't get close. Not with their skittishness. They had to fight far away, and the only thing they could do was use bows. They were silent but deadly. And yes, the compound bows were powerful, but this was considered to be a war. They needed a lot more firepower for that to happen. They needed a whole army of compound bows. Blacksmith Sekka approached Lady Farron with the utmost respect. We do not want to borrow it and use it ourselves, he said. We simply want it to be inspected, so that we may try and replicate it ourselves. That was right. One of the main reasons as to why they wanted the Blacksmith Sekka here was so that he could somehow replicate the power of the compound bow and duplicate it to all of their members. That was the only way they were going to have a fighting chance against the ersatz. After hearing this, Michael couldn't help but feel a little bit awkward. Of course, having the compound bow be duplicated sting a little bit, but it was completely harmless. He fully expected people to be able to duplicate the compound bow with a little bit of time. He didn't mind that the Blacksmith Sekka wanted to try and replicate it. The problem was that he'll fail. First of all, the power of the compound bow comes from precision. Yes, blacksmiths of the Hephaestus clan were not lacking in skills of any sort. However, they still couldn't do it as fast as the Rebornian factories. At most, Sekka and his group of blacksmiths would only be able to create about 10 copies by the end of the day. That was already pushing it. That wouldn't be enough. Not by a long shot. And not only that, but one of the things that made the compound bows of the elves so powerful was because they were made out of the two most powerful materials, mithril and darkwood. Those were things that only Reborn could provide. And there Michael saw a chance. Perhaps this was a way to worm his way into the upper echelons. Chapter 1158 Making a Spot. Lady Farron immediately shook her head. I cannot, in good faith, let you inspect the compound bow. It is not my property. It is not a secret that I can simply give away. A lot of people were confused with her words. After all, weren't the compound bow hers? Wasn't it the property of the elves? They could understand her saying that she didn't want them to copy the mechanics of the bow. They would have accepted that. She didn't have to say that it wasn't hers. So, she must have been telling the truth. But if so, then who did own it? Then, who owns this compound bow? Asked Gordon Zentmeister. Lady Farron was about to shake her head. While Michael didn't tell her to keep it a secret, she sure wouldn't want to tell it to everyone without his express permission. Bzzz, bzzz. All of a sudden, she felt a vibration in the hems of her skirt. She took out her phone. A message notification was written on the screen. And once she read its contents, she immediately pivoted her stance on the whole situation. If you want to learn the compound bow, then you must ask its owner. A lot of people were still beholden by the strange metal brick in her hands. But the prospect of somehow borrowing the compound bow simply overpowered that curiosity. Mr. Wadeby immediately stepped forward. Please tell us so that I may kowtow to their feet and ask them for this favor. Then, Lady Farron raised her hand, pointing towards the crowd. People made way as they backed away from Lady Farron's pointing hands. And eventually it landed towards the group of royal blood vampires that everyone seemed to have forgotten. What? The vampires created the compound bows? How? They're not famed for their blacksmithing culture. It was at this moment that Lady Farron shook her head. Look closely, she said. They began to pinpoint the location her finger was pointed. And there, They saw that it didn't land on Arthrax himself. Instead, it was on the violet slime that was perched atop his head. Many were still unbelieving of this. Doubt and confusion painted on their faces. There was no way. There must have been a mistake. But Fudge, the harmless violet slime, hopped on over towards Lady Farron with a laughter that echoed through the 6 walls of the garrison. Foo-foo-foo. Lady Farron lowered her gaze as Fudge approached her. Mr. Fudge, it has been a while. Have you been finding it well? Fudge jumped atop Lady Farron's head, which she had graciously lowered for him to perch on. Good, good. You have passed my test. You have been treating the compound bows well. If you had told them the truth about it, I would have confiscated them from you. Fudge laughed. My master doesn't like tattletales. Lady Farron bowed. I would never reveal unless your master commands me to do so. After seeing this interaction, everyone was simply at a loss for words. Somehow, even the elves were treating this slime with the utmost respect. Now, they were starting to realize that maybe the royal blood vampires weren't that crazy after all. Was this slime really a big deal as he was presenting himself as? Mr. Fudge, these humans wish to borrow the compound bow for their own use. Fudge looked at everyone, and everyone looked at him with utter shock. They would have never thought that this little slime would be the very person they needed to kowtow towards. Now, if they wanted access to the compound bows, then they would need to bow in respect to the little slime. Foo-foo-foo. You are all very fortunate, Fudge said, his voice booming. If you want our help, then you must help fulfill our conditions. Gordon Zentmeister stepped forward. In his face, there was no longer any surprise at the slime taking control of the situation. As an experienced negotiator, he knew that he would need to bow down to Fudge if he wanted those compound bows. Very well. Sir Fudge, was it? First of all, on behalf of everyone here in the garrison, we apologize for treating you with less respect that you deserve. But you must forgive us. This is a very hectic time for all of us. After all, we are fighting an enemy that threatens to destroy the fabric of peace in the world. You have your own conditions. Please tell us, so that we may use those compound bows to fight against the ersatz. Fudge looked towards an empty spot in the air, nodding towards the place where Michael's drone was hidden. My master is very generous. He would like to help your cause. But if we were to do so, then we need to be hands-on with such a project. We need to be involved. Michael was glad that Fudge reiterated his words without changing much of anything. This was his chance. He wanted a seat at their table. If he was involved in this mission, then he may be involved in others as well. And, Fudge continued, you must all be servants of the Iron Maiden. Michael slapped his own forehead in disappointment. Stick to the script, he shouted inwardly. Everyone looked at each other. Gordon Zentmeister took the initiative and gathered all 6 faction leaders together for a decision. And after a few minutes of deliberation, they came back with an answer. We will be able to provide your organization with a place here in our garrison, Gordon said. But we cannot force our members to believe in your religion. That is an immovable stance. Fudge clicked his tongue. Tisk, whatever. Fine, we agree. The others heaved a sigh or relief. But then Fudge said, now, get these campfire out of here. And without even asking for permission, Fudge's shadow began swallowing the very center of the garrison. Every bench, armor stand, and tent disappearing into the darkness, leaving only an empty space. This is where we will be staying, Fudge demanded. Chapter 1159, Rebornian Life. Everyone was surprised to see the sudden intrusion, but they could only swallow their words. Right now, the violet slime was king. He held the key to getting those compound bows. So they would do whatever this little monster pleased. Suddenly, shadows began to emerge all along the walls of the garrison. These were people of the slime, they realized. They brought with them some strange materials, metal contraptions that they had never ever seen before. It wasn't long before there was a large structure now built upon the center of the garrison. What was supposed to be the common ground for all of these warring 6 factions now became home to an entirely new one. Because of this, a lot of the upper echelons and conglomerates began to wonder. Who was this strange new organization? Who did the slime belong to? Who was so beyond the confines of the current understanding of smithing that they were able to create such a masterpiece? And as it turned out, the answer laid out right in front of their very eyes. A large R etched on golden threads, waving in a flag. Most people wouldn't have recognized it. But Gordon Zentmeister, as well as the other upper echelons who have had the pleasure of dealing with this emblem time and time again knew. It was the Reborn Company. No way. The Reborn Company. They're the one who the slime belongs to. We let a lower echelon company into our sacred mission? Gordon sat in his own tent, completely shocked as he tried to process this information. Yes, it was widely rumored that the young master who created the Reborn Company was allied with the elves, the vampires, the werewolves, and the mermen. They were the only ones to do so, when even the conglomerates found it hard to juggle the different needs of such beastfolk. And yes, the evidence was right there in front of their eyes. They just couldn't reconcile it. The White Dragonborn, the demi-human who shocked the entire world by showing that even they could wield the power of magnetics. She wielded the compound bow. She made it popular. But they would have never thought that it was the Reborn company who created them. It would have made more sense if the elves did. Since they were allied with them anyways, it wasn't far-fetched to think that the Reborn company struck a deal with them to borrow one for the White Dragonborn. But the truth was stranger than fiction. It was Reborn who armed these elves into a complete powerhouse. Which meant they too probably housed their own powder kegs. Many of these upper echelons already hated the idea of Reborn in the feast. Much more here in the most critical mission that could decide the very fate of humanity itself. But they came here of their own merit. They proved it before the first hour struck. Fudge demanded a meeting with all the leaders of 6 factions. And in that meeting, he showed the results of their prodding. They're located here and here and here and here. We'll be able to pierce through this part of the pocket dimension with ease. Gordon and the rest of the faction leaders could only watch with wide eyes as Fudge revealed critical locations of the ersatz members. They couldn't believe it. They'd spend days trying to break through the shroud that blinded the world from ersatz. But somehow, this violet slime just broke through that veil with such casualness that people dared not believe it. It wasn't until they sent their own team to scout ahead of these critical locations where Fudge's words deemed true. It was at this moment that Gordon and the rest of the leaders realized that the Reborn company was needed if they truly wanted this mission to succeed. They were vital. Blacksmith Sekka was allowed inside the Rebornian structure in the garrison. And there, he was starstruck to see such strange technologies before him. Metals that whirred like dragons. Walls that moved and roared as if it was real life. They called it the TV. He didn't have time to wonder what it was as he was called to meet with the dwarves. Yes, dwarves. Blacksmith Sekka was awestruck. He'd never seen the legendary smiths of the world. They'd segregated themselves from everyone, at least that's what he thought. Yet now, he saw multiple dwarves within the Rebornian structure, slamming their hammers on anvils. "Hey you! If you want to learn, keep your eyes on the fire," barked one of the dwarves. Blacksmith Sekka was a genius in the Hephaestus clan. He was the son of a saint. Yet, he felt like he was a beginner in front of these dwarves. But that wasn't even the most surprising part. It was the fact that they weren't the main workers of their smith. It was these giant metallic claws and hammers that pounded pure or into something polished. They moved with absolute precision. No mistakes. These mechanical, metal monsters passed their finished materials until crude material turned into a gem of a work. Then, and only then, would the dwarves put on the finishing touches, turning work into pure art. Everything happened within moments, making Blacksmith Sekka barely even breathe in the process. These factory lines, as they called them, slashed the dwarves' work by more than 90%. The works that grunts and apprentices would have done shoddily were instead being done by these precision machines for much finer and much faster work. At the end, the compound bow lay at the end of the process. Blacksmith Sekka stared in wonder. He thought masterpieces like these would need only one hand for molding. Yet the mechanical claws proved him wrong. Truly opened his eyes. It was at this point that he realized the true power of the Reborn company. How they could produce those automobiles at faster rates than even ants reproduce. "Please take me in as your apprentice," Sekka shouted. Michael was shocked to learn that a 9th-stage body formation blacksmith had come to become the apprentice of the dwarves. Blacksmith Sekka was only half-step away from the nascent spirit realm. In terms of an army, one could consider him as a true, bona fide general. Yet now, this general was now begging to be let into their ranks, even if he had to lower himself into a pawn in the process. Looks like he had taken into the factory process even better than Michael thought. He had only hoped that he could somehow convince these upper echelons and conglomerates to give him a shot. But as it turned out, all he had to do was give them a glimpse of the Rebornian process and they would simply line up to be his ally. And so, he continued with this kind of thinking. In the Rebornian structure at the center of the garrison, he made sure to fully display the decadence, comfort, and peaceful lifestyle that a Rebornian was privy to. First, he showed them the free-flowing waters. He installed a plumbing system that allowed his soldiers to draw water for drinking or for bathing, catching the eyes of these stinky and grimy soldiers. Seeing the Rebornian look so clean as a baby, the conglomerates and the upper echelons began to wonder. What are they doing? Magic. Whatever it is, don't get fooled. This is merely a ploy. One that will get us to purchase their products. Remember, they are our enemy. They are our rivals. They are the very ones threatening to throw us out of our rightful place in the upper echelons. Even if they weren't feeling resentful about the Reborn company, that didn't mean that they were going to be playing good with them. Yes, they had now accepted the Reborn company to be in this mission. But only through that extent. They simply needed their compound bows and nothing more. Many of the officers in the companies instructed their members to do exactly that. Ignore the Reborn company. However, the human heart was quite the emotional one. They moved based on what they need, what they want, rather than what they were told. What I'd give to swim in a warm river right now. Magic water feels so bland. It doesn't feel refreshing at all. Right after finding out the secret locations of the ersatz members, the factions began to move. They sent out their soldiers and sieged them with the element of surprise. The Reborn company was the only one left behind. Gordon and the others reasoned that Reborn's army wasn't trained in cooperation with the other factions. But it was clear that they were still doubting Reborn's ability for war. They may be good at creating constructs but not in fights. Michael was okay with this. Right now, the factions were just fighting the outskirts of the ersatz members. They're inconsequential. If they wanted to risk their own men, then he'd let them. Right now, he had other things on his mind. About an hour after their deployment, the soldiers returned, battered, bloodied and exhausted. Magnetic battles were fast, but brutal. And when they returned to the garrison, they saw steam rising in the center. They thought it was fire, but as it turned out, it was just coming from hot water. "Welcome to the sauna," the Rebornian demi-human said. Chapter 1160 Soldiers Finding Comfort. When the soldiers returned from a bloody battle, all they wanted to do was to return to their posts, relax, and maybe take a cold bath to take their minds off of the warm blood on their bodies. Relaxing was easy. Bathing, not so much. Magicians could easily conjure a lake's worth of water for these soldiers. But like many have said, these magical waters weren't comfortable or refreshing in any way, shape, or form. They'd already been bathed with magic and ability power in their fights. By bathing themselves in magical water, they would only be transporting themselves back on the battlefield, turning the whole purpose or relaxation on its end. And the problem with a controlled and hidden pocket dimension was that one couldn't go in and out of the place as they pleased, lest the ersatz find their garrison. Because of that, the soldiers, wizards, and fighters of these 6 factions knew that they wouldn't be able to make themselves relax while they were in a war against ersatz. They went into this mission with that express expectation. They would sacrifice these few days as long as they could win the war against the ersatz. But imagine their surprise when they came back into the garrison, seeing the Rebornian men and women relaxing in wooden tubs of steaming hot water. They looked relaxed, like they were in heaven. Immediately, resentment began to build and bubble up inside these soldiers. While they risked their lives, lost their friends, and toiled the treacherous battlefield, these Rebornians were here relaxing. It was only when they stormed much closer were they approached by a demi-human from Reborn. "Welcome back. What type of refreshments would you want after the bath? Cold water or cold milk?" the Rebornian asked. The demi-human's question confused these soldiers. And in their confusion, they didn't notice as these friendly attendants began ushering them inside the small area filled with many tubs of hot water. They found themselves naked, with only a towel covering their nakedness, as they entered the so-called hot springs. And as soon as their feet touched the steaming hot water, they couldn't help but let out a gasp of shock. Just one touch and they knew. This was real water. Water from the very ground itself. And it was also warmed at the perfect temperature. Not too hot to scald their vulnerable, injured skin, and not too cold to make the experience worthless. It was the perfect temperature that was scientifically proven to increase recovery within battered muscles. Complaints turned into comforting oohs and ahs. "I wish we had these back home." "Shush! Don't let our superiors hear that. We're not supposed to like Reborn, remember?" But the more they experienced the lifestyles of the Rebornians, the more they found it hard to follow orders. Right after the hot bath, the soldiers were allowed to spend a little bit of time inside the Rebornian structure. And there, they saw the Rebornians lounging in cold air, bright lights, and a comforting decorations that made them feel as if they were inside a palace rather than a garrison. The Rebornians made all of this within less time than a candle to go out. Unbelievable. These soldiers, those from the conglomerates and the upper echelons, decided to mingle inside the Rebornian structures. Their superiors told them to gather intel, find information about how Reborn was doing all of this. But these soldiers weren't spies. They weren't taught how to disregard their base urges. When they heard the Rebornians shout in excitement, they couldn't help but peek their heads through the door. And there, they saw the Rebornians cheering at a wall. No, not a wall, but a painting. One whose color was as vivid as real life, movement as fluid, and sounds as if they were a portal to the other side of the world itself. They seemed to be looking at some sort of sport, or at least that's what seemed like it. The two teams were wearing differently colored uniforms to easily distinguish their alliances. These Rebornians cheered and they booed, all while whining and dining with the best food and quality of life that even royals would only dream of. "You're welcome to come inside, comrade." Of course, these soldiers were interested, but they were hesitant. We shouldn't. This is your own. But the Rebornian demi-human stopped him. Lord Michael told us that we are brothers in arms. We all want the same thing. To defeat those ersatz rats. Yeah. The Rebornians cheered. Now this, the soldiers could understand. They just came from fighting the ersatz zombies in hordes. Their anger for them was as fresh as the injuries in their body. After a few more convincing, these soldiers eventually came inside and partook in the watch party for a baseball game back in the nation of Reborn. Michael was glad that things were going well. It has only been a few hours since they established themselves in the garrison, but they've already gathered quite a few allies from all the 6 factions. Well, maybe not allies, but they were at least sympathetic to the Reborn idea. They were starting to get used to the comfort that they provide for each and every citizen. And things have been going well in the exhibition tournament as well. Phoenix and Jakku had successfully advanced to the top 8, defeating their enemies with absolute certainty. Consequently, the chocolate ice cream endeavor had gone swimmingly well. His blanket of protection worked like a charm, probably to the dismay of those who had conspired against him, which coincidentally was right here in the garrison. Gordon was the one who created that nascent influence. Michael wondered what kind of reaction the guy had when he realized. Gordon Zentmeister stood in his own barracks, eyes out watching the windows as people came in and out of the Rebornian structure. With him was the patriarch of the Moon Rising Company, Mr. Wadeby. They were allies, part of the same clique. The same one who created the nascent influence. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.